Thank you for watching, liking, commenting, sharing, and subscribing right now.
I get that right?
Hi, I'm Larry Halff from Ma.gnolia, and I'm joined today by Tara Hunt from Citizen Agency. How close do I have to be?
I don't know.
For my clicker to...
I can run it for you, too.
Oh, there we go. So today, I'm here to talk about the open web. And I'm going to try and cover a lot of ground, and I think this is probably a lot of ground that a lot of you already know about, but I think it's great to have a little review session about where the open web has come from and how it's evolved and sort of where it's going. I have to be sorry.
Do you want me to?
I'll stick closer to home here. So I think, since I'm going to be throwing this word around a lot, the word open, I think we should talk about what I mean by open, because, you know, who doesn't love open? It can mean anything we want it to mean. But when I'm talking about open, I'm talking about things that evolve out of a community, things that are community-driven, and that means a group of people coming together around a common problem and coming up with a solution that they all can use and works for all of them. And I don't mean, you know, one person saying, you know, I'm going to invent this new thing and it's going to fix the world, or one corporation coming along and saying, we're going to fix this for all of our customers. This is really about groups of companies and people coming together to solve problems. It's evolutionary. Open doesn't really solve new problems. It's not a novel invention. We aren't out trying to come up with this brand new revolutionary thing that no one has thought of before. Open is really about taking best pieces of various solutions that people have applied out there and coming up with the most basic, the simplest one that will work for everyone. The other aspect of open is that it's transparent. And transparent doesn't mean that anyone can join in. It doesn't mean that when you're working on something open that, you know, you basically have invited the entire world to come and muck with your process and muck with your solution. What it doesn't mean is that you've invited or working with key stakeholders to come up with something in a way that anybody can watch and see what you're doing. You are transparent, and that means people can see what your process is. You have a clearly defined process, and people can understand what it is, if and how they can participate. And then, as you come up with a solution, you can present it to the broader community, and you know they'll vote with their feet. They'll either accept it or not. So this is what I mean by open. So I think there's sort of three, as I said in the title, there's sort of three kinds of open I'm talking about that the open web is being built upon. And since I'm talking about the open web, I'll throw up this wonderful mouthful definition up here. And this is the definition we're working with at Ma.gnolia, which is the open web is a collection of peer-developed, non-proprietary frameworks for building services, emphasizing interoperability and the balance of data access and ownership between providers and end users. There's a lot going on in here, but I think the salient point is not all the stuff that's in here, but the fact that the open web is actually not an end. We aren't going to reach the open web. There's not going to be a time where we're living in the open web. The open web is actually a process. It's a process of evolving and developing these open standards and open data, and also the balance between our relationships amongst each other and our relationships with our service providers. So the first open in the open web I'm going to talk about is open data. This has been around a long time. We all know about this. And two great examples are syndication and microformats. Syndication, RSS, Atom, we're all using it. But I think it's super important because it's what really allowed blogging and personal publishing to take off, that people could connect with one another and connect with the things they were publishing and consume them and use them and stay connected with each other in a way that didn't require a whole lot of overhead of going to different places and looking at websites and blah, blah, blah. And it also, since it created a standard machine-readable format for all of this, you could sort of remix that data in interesting ways. And here we have an example of an unexpected sort of mashup with Ma.gnolia, which is iPhoto reads photo feeds, photo streams. So you plug in, I plugged in the feed for my contacts, the people I'm connected with on Ma.gnolia, their bookmarks, and it pulls up a visualization of the websites that all of my contacts are saving. Now, the flip side of this is microformats. It came along a little later. And the important thing about microformats is it was like, well, what if we actually build the good remixability stuff from feeds, from syndication, into the actual pages themselves? And it's designed for human first. So it's easy to code, it's easy to put in your web pages, and machine second. Microformats are a set of simple open data formats built upon existing and widely adopted standards. So it's basically taking the web pages that anyone is making and building in some machine-readable, remixable data into them. And here we can see, while I'd say microformats are about 3 years old, we're really just starting to see the application of them. And I think a great one is the operator plugin for Firefox. And whenever you're at a page, it detects any of the microformats found in there. And Ma.gnolia is pretty heavily microformatted. But here you can see these are all the tags that my contacts are looking at. And from within the browser, I can then pivot on those tags that come up. So moving on, I mean, we've had wide adoption of open data. It's something we're all using. And as websites saw the power of putting this data out there, we started seeing more and more public APIs and interoperability between desktop applications and web applications. And a different sort of open came along, which were open standards. How do we allow these different websites and applications to communicate with each other more easily? And a supernatural extension of the blog was OpenID. With blogging, people started seeing themselves as represented by their website. My blog is a representation of myself. And there's a huge problem, which is that with all these different websites holding all of our data in different places, how do you sort of consolidate your identity across these so you aren't having to maintain a whole bunch of different logins and representations of yourself across them? And evolved out of this problem and the fact that we could start identifying ourselves with URLs came OpenID. You can see this is our OpenID sign-in form, and we started supporting OpenID in, I think, December of 2006. And actually, in March of 2007, we went exclusively with external identity to create new accounts, which is you have to use an OpenID or Facebook to create an account in Ma.gnolia. And again, this really came out of desire to solve a problem which was facing everyone on the internet, and put it out there so that it was free for everyone to use. And here we can see Brad Fitzpatrick, who's sort of the father of OpenID, not sort of is the father of OpenID. He said the goal is to release every part of this under the most liberal license possible, so there's no money or licensing or registering required to play. It benefits the community as a whole if something like this exists, and we're all part of the community. So along with OpenID, more issues came along because we were using desktop applications, web applications, to access our data across different sites. You had to have a way of granting access for these applications to go in and fetch your data for you. And the standard way was you go in and you give application X your username and password for this web service, and they go and get your data. And this was a pretty terrible idea because you're basically saying, yes, you can now grab and save my login credentials, and pretty much you have access to everything on this service. And if you happen to lose them, well then the entire world could possibly find out my username and password. And I think this is especially salient with the Google case, where all these social websites wanted to allow you to find your friends using your Google address book, and so they had you give them your Google login and password. And basically with that, not only do they have access to your contacts, which is all they needed, they had access to your mail and to perhaps your Google checkout, with your credit card information and process payments, and all sorts of bad stuff could happen. So aside from the security stuff with this, there's also the fact that if you're using OpenID or you're using some sort of external identity system, you don't have a username and password to give. And here you can see this is actually the flip side of the Ma.gnolia widget for Mac OS, and this was developed before we went all OpenID, and we're asking for a screen name and password, but if you have an OpenID account on Ma.gnolia, you can actually use this widget. So a bunch of us got together and said, if we're going to see the widespread adoption of OpenID, then we need to come up with a solution to granting people access to their data on other sites. And me and Blaine and David Ray Cordone and Pounce and eventually Google and Yahoo and AOL got together and put together something called OAuth, which is basically a delegated authentication mechanism, and it's an open protocol to allow secure API authentication in a simple and standard method for desktop and web applications. So now, instead of having to put in a username and password to grant API access to an application, you actually go through a process where you say, the application says, I want access to your data. You go to the site Ma.gnolia, and this is what happens is you say, do you want to allow this other application to access your data on Ma.gnolia? You can say yes or no, and then you can always revoke that access later or modify how they can access it. So a couple of iterations through this with OpenID and OAuth, we encounter the common problem of when you're developing these open standards, you have to go through this pretty horrible process called IPR, which is intellectual property release. And so sort of a meta open standard has come about, which is we're put together a foundation called the Open Web Foundation, which sort of will standardize the process of going through releasing all the IP as open standards develop and encourage. This will help encourage open standards to flourish because once everybody, all these parties had sort of worked on OAuth and said, yes, we're going to use it, and yes, other people can use it, we've been going through the process of getting everyone to sign and say, no, we won't sue anyone else for using this, which is pretty important because otherwise it won't be adopted. And if there's no, if it won't be adopted by the big players, it's not going to spread. So
I'm going to just talk a little bit about the openness and transparency that Ma.gnolia has shown to their community. And one of the, I don't work for Ma.gnolia. I've been a consultant for them for a couple of years. But the reason that I've been a consultant for them is just because I really, really admire Larry and Todd's commitment to keeping open and transparent with their community. And these are just some of the ways that I'm going to explain how they have taken the human side of being open with Ma.gnolia itself. So first of all, they have a commitment to openness and transparency. So no matter what they're doing, what they're working on, they talk about it with their community openly. They invite people in to test really early on and give them feedback before they implement things site-wide. And then when they implement things site-wide and whether things go right or wrong, they'll talk about it. So there's a really great blog post that I'll be showing you in a second that talks a lot about what people can learn from their mistakes as well as from their successes. And they've also been really early to use all the tools online to help them achieve this. So their Twitter account, Ma.gnolia was actually one of the first companies to use Twitter for the purpose of communicating with their community. Now we see all sorts of companies on there doing all sorts of this stuff, but very, very early on, I think it was my my ex-business partner, Chris Messina, who had said, I really love this Twitter thing. In January 2007, this is pre-South by Southwest when everybody got on and said, Larry, you should think about, communicating with Ma.gnolia members over it. And so, sure enough, Larry got on there, and ever since then, they've been using it for reporting outages and updates and communicating with the community members. And then Get Satisfaction. Does everybody here know what Get Satisfaction is? Who doesn't? No. So quickly, it's open sort of customer service. It's very, very transparent. And they started this in November 2007, shortly after the launch of the site itself. And they use this for open and transparent customer service feedback and generation of new ideas. And it's quite lively discussion on there. Then there's a Ma.gnolia blog, and this is the blog post that I was referring to when they, so Larry talked earlier about making Ma.gnolia logged in only by OpenID. This was in March of this year, and so everybody went, whoa, like, won't that prevent people from actually signing up? Isn't that gonna hold you back from getting new adoption, especially since, they had a lot of new Facebook users coming into Ma.gnolia. And in fact, they were able to pull out stats from that particular action and show that OpenID reduced spam, and actually the signups didn't drop at all, and it was all clean, and it just led to sort of a bigger community embracement, because people that were big OpenID fans decided at that point to switch to Ma.gnolia. So they published those stats, and then other companies could follow from that. So they've been blogging since even before launch, and I know this is a common practice now, but back when Ma.gnolia started, it wasn't very common to be so transparent about the process. So building in community involvement itself into the product. So yeah, we talk about openness, transparency, that sort of thing. But Ma.gnolia has been really, really set on getting people to actually contribute to the product and communicate with Ma.gnolia and one another to make their user experience much better. So they've also, I'll show you, given people tools to actually be part of the core responsibility of Ma.gnolia. So this little movie that I created is a give thanks feature on Ma.gnolia. Really, really simple. All you do, it's kind of like a Facebook poke, but with less ambiguity. You see somebody's bookmark that you like, and you say, and you like it, you say thanks. And it sends them a little message. It doesn't go on, doesn't boost their ranking like a dig would. It just gives them a little message that says, thanks for this bookmark. The person feels good because they know that they've contributed to their followers, and it's kind of nice. And we had no idea that when it was implemented that it would get so much great feedback. But most people that blog about Ma.gnolia or that talk about Ma.gnolia, that's the first thing they say is like, what won me is the little give thanks feature, this tiny little thing. But it creates this really nice warmth within the community. Ma.gnolia Groups was an evolution in social bookmarking at the time, and this allowed people to gather around issues and share bookmarks and have discussions around bookmarks that would arise that perhaps might have not happened without groups. And there's a Gardener program. I'm really proud of my little trowel. I used to call it a hoe, but Larry told me not to call it a hoe. Then there's the Facebook app. Ma.gnolia was part of the F8 launch way back when, and so you can feed your Ma.gnolia bookmarks out to Facebook, but you can also log in with your Facebook. You can also log in with your Facebook page into as it's an ID provider. So that's really cool as well. So Facebook members could just log into Ma.gnolia through their Facebook pages if that's what they choose as their identity. There's, this is different pages from the Facebook app. You can look at your friends' bookmarks. You can have it in your friend feed or in your feed. Or there's also the boxes. I don't know why companies call them different things. There's widgets and gadgets and boxes, but these are boxes. So I'll pass this back to Larry.
So while a lot has happened, we built a lot on open data and using open standards and done a lot of great stuff with community. We're starting to see us pushing some of the limits of this. And so I just want to talk about a couple of current problems that I think the open web is facing right now. The first one is we have a lot of single points of failure. And what I mean by this is single websites that are sort of people are coming to depend on that basically when they go down, an entire sort of segment of communication goes down. And I think the fail whale is pretty famous, and Twitter outages, though it seems to be in a pretty good place these days, But Twitter isn't the only one. I mean, Twitter gets a lot of coverage because people just depend on the instantness of it. But, you know, Amazon has been down. I think they had a pretty big outage this spring. Flickr gets its massages every once in a while. And, of course, Ma.gnolia, we've had our own issues sometimes when the servers are not behaving the way they should. And I don't think this is a systemic problem. This is a problem. I don't think you can't always be up. You can't necessarily guarantee, you can never guarantee 100% uptime. So it's a problem with the idea that we want to have these single services that basically keep one component of everything we do, like all of our photos, all of our little messages, you know, where we shop. Another issue which is community coherence, and this is about, you know, communities able to find each other and support each other and pull in desirable members. And I mean, that's sort of this is approach, but I'm also really talking about spammers here and truly bad actors, people who are trying to take advantage of the social system or abuse it or do horrible things like pull you into multi-level marketing schemes and sell you, you know, stop smoking patches. But we can look at this in terms of, rather than focusing on the bad aspects of how can we give communities the tools and people the tools to discover each other, yet also not necessarily be interrupted by the people who are trying to disrupt. And I don't like to present problems without solutions. And the solutions we've come up to these at Ma.gnolia is a two-step thing, and it's decentralize and federate. And decentralize is a model that's out there, and it's working, and it exists. And decentralizing, going again back to blogs, basically, you know, you can download your own WordPress, your own movable type, your own blogging platform, and run it on your own server or your own server instance on a shared host. And it's pretty isolated from outages. And even design-wise, like TypePad and WordPress.com, there's no sort of interoperating parts between the blogs that they're hosting. They can all run independently and they can all be isolated. However, it's kind of a lonely universe. I mean, we go back to the fact that you have to, if you want to connect, you just have to make these sort of one-on-one connections to subscribe to someone's feed, and you don't really have a way to contact the person unless they give it to you, you know, an email address or some or form on their site. And it doesn't really build the community stuff that has come out of having these more centralized services. So it's not a great solution. I mean, it's a great solution because it solves a single point of failure, but it's not a great solution because it gets rid of all of the icing on the cake, which is where federation comes in. And federation basically says, let's decentralize all these things, but then create a cloud, a service in the cloud, where if the service goes down, the individual instances don't stop operating, but this service can provide all the social support infrastructure. And the three things we're looking at are community directory, and that's like, how do you find other people using Ma.gnolia? How do you find other people out there in the world that you want to connect with? And on our site now, since we host every Ma.gnolia account, you can just search our database of users and find your friends. The other is message delivery. How do you communicate with the people you want to be connected to? How do you send them thanks? How do you send them bookmark recommendations? How do you invite them to groups? And this is something where there's already a lot of good work with SMTP and Jabber in terms of, like, if you can't connect to an instance right away, how do you handle the delivery of those messages? So that's something you probably want to stick in the cloud too. And finally, is aggregated search. And this is really the foundation of social bookmarking, which is how do you discover what other people are looking at. So when you go to a site and you do a global tag search, you can see what everybody is tagging with GNOME-DEX 8. So if you put these things in the cloud, you can eliminate the single point of failure, yet restore all the social functionality in this sort of federated model. And you can actually do some really interesting other things with that, which is, let's say you don't have one cloud, you can set up your own little community cloud of this and separate off and do unique things with messages, like, let's say everybody who's allowed to connect to federate around this one server is allowed to send each other messages rather than having more intricate messaging permissions. Or let's say you have a community of researchers all working together and they want to have their search work around a restricted vocabulary, so your aggregated search actually only looks at, will only actually index things that are part of that restricted vocabulary rather than index anything. And it just sort of allows people to form, actually, in a technical way, form their own communities rather than having to participate or insert themselves into one huge worldwide, unboundaried community. So I promised you 3 kinds of open, and the third kind of open is open source. How do you make this stuff proliferate out there? To make this happen, people need to be able to download and install these things, and not just their individual instances of the platform, but you also need to be able to put your own clouds out there, set up your own servers. And again, the reason blogging took off was a lot because of the publishing of open source blogging platforms like WordPress, and then Movable Type followed with that. So what we're going to do is we're going to start development of Ma.gnolia 2, which will be an open source, distributed, and federated social bookmarking system.
We missed the drum roll there.
Oh. Does anybody have a drum roll? Yeah. Open source. Oh.
Ma.gnolia
Darn.
open source.
So this is sort of our attempt to start advancing the open web by putting out the building blocks of what will be the next steps in the open web of decentralization and federation. And this is our roadmap. Currently, we're in the design phase. You can participate in our design process. We're publishing all of our design documents, and we have the project charter and overview up right now. And there's a Google group for discussion around that. We're going to start releasing code on GitHub in September, beta release in December, and a final in first quarter of 2009. And even though this is what we're doing, it's like this is really all of our project. The open web is a whole of all of our projects. So I would hope everyone here will do sort of at least 3 things. And they're all 3 easy 3 things. The first one we're already doing, which is create and publish using open formats. We're all blogging. We're all pushing things out in RSS and syndication. I hope a lot of us are using microformats. It's super easy. If not, just go check out the website. The second one is advocate for open standards. If you're using services out there, let them know that you care about making the web, the parts of the web work better together, and that they should start adopting some of these standards like OpenID and OAuth. And the final is use and contribute to open source products, which is, check out the open source versions of things, use them, and if you are a coder and if you want to help contribute, definitely feedback and contributing code back is always appreciated. And if you want to get involved with what we're doing at Ma.gnolia, here is a bunch of URLs.
So Larry is one of the most humble people I know, so he was like, oh, it's no big deal. We're just open sourcing Ma.gnolia for everybody to use. So that's why I'm up here, because I think this is a really exciting time. Any questions that you guys have? Oh, there's one right there.
Can I get a
Microphone.
Really simple one. What the heck is Ma.gnolia? What does it do?
Ma.gnolia is a community bookmarking service.
Social bookmarks.
Social bookmarks, but our focus is on helping people connect and form communities.
How many months or years are we away from having like Gmail and everything we log into become OpenID? Just use that way instead of the current method.
I think we're probably months away. Gmail has Google has a Google identity system. And I don't know what they're planning on doing with it, but they have their own sort of version of OpenID for all their Google properties. I do know that there was an OAuth summit I guess it was back in June. And on that day, they flipped a switch, and every Google property, all the APIs are now OAuth enabled. So any site that's accessing information on Google should be using OAuth now.
Hi, so this seems like a pretty big shift for you guys in terms of a business model. How is that changing your overall business model?
Our business model is revolved around providing additional services around hosted Ma.gnolia accounts and also helping people set up federated systems. And tons of money on Google AdWords.
So, as you know, WordPress has always been, the download has always been free, but Automatic has been able to generate, create all sorts of services around that as far as helping people, as well as extra sort of pieces that people can upgrade to. So there's an opportunity here if a big company or a big news organization wants to have their own bookmarking site and want to tie back to Ma.gnolia, but they want extra stuff involved or customization that they need help with, that sort of thing can, for instance.
Yeah, business-wise, it's very close to
It's actually
WordPress.
it's lots more than social bookmarking in itself. Marshall.
Hey guys, congratulations on the announcement. I think it's awesome. I think Ma.gnolia is already a better service in almost every way than Delicious, but it doesn't have the network effects of the huge numbers of users that Delicious has. And I wonder how open sourcing it is going to change the value proposition in such a way that balance could shift a little bit and give me more reason to keep using Ma.gnolia and to recommend it to other people, instead of just wishing that you had more users so that search is more effective, et cetera.
Well, first of all, we're really happy to help Read Write Web set up their own bookmarking network. And of course, that would help Ma.gnolia because Read Write Web community could also access and work back and forth with the Ma.gnolia resources.
And I think one of the key pieces of federation is, I'm pretty sure we actually cover this in the charter. I didn't cover this in the presentation, is that we're going to be sort of looking at ways that we can federate with sites that don't necessarily have the federation stuff built in. So if you want to connect to a community of people already using Delicious, is you'll be able to pull them into your social bookmarking space in Ma.gnolia. So you don't necessarily have to, you aren't restricted within other Ma.gnolia users. And that, I mean, this would be basically also an open call. It's like not just Delicious, but other bookmarking or tagging platforms would be welcome to play.
Does that answer your question, Marshall? Sort of.
Sort of.
Catch us on the break and talk a little more. Go ahead.
Hi, Alex Williams. Hey, just curious, telling us a little bit more about your concept behind federated systems, and what is your view on that, and how does it play into your business over the next foreseeable future? I'm just curious about how you view federated systems and how they play into your business.
Well, we view federated systems as a way for give people more adaptability and control over the pieces of the social web they're using, so that rather than being locked into one site or one platform, they can assemble the right components and connect with the right communities for them. So, I mean, Facebook has done a really interesting job, say a good job of creating a fairly open ecosystem. They even somewhat open source the code behind their platform. But it still is not, you're still really locked into what they're doing. And so the idea we see behind federation is developing enough open standards and data formats that you aren't locked into a single platform, that you can pick and choose the best services that are, and the ones that are servicing the communities you want to be a part of.
What's one of the things that I think is really exciting about it is that, currently the idea, and I think the promise of APIs and RSS and all the other sort of open technologies allows us to never have to go to the core website. But when it comes to like all the Facebook applications, we kind of have to go to the core website to interact with them and a whole bunch of other functionality. But wouldn't it be nice if, you know, our blogs, I think, have really become, and my blog in particular, has become sort of my central identity. If I could interact with my entire, you know, community of people that I want to interact with, you know, using the same amount of tools, using all the really cool things that are available, using my Ma.gnolia bookmarks, all my Facebook functions from my blog, that would be ideal. And I think that's what the federated model allows me to do. Currently, my blog is separate from everything else except for a couple little widgets here and there. But in the future, here's hoping that I have my own, you know, island in the midst of all the other islands that are going on that are connected, that we have little bridges.
And I should also mention that I'm terrible for not having mentioned this sooner, but the blog side of this, the blogging side of this, everyone should look at DSO, which is looking at building this same sort of thing, federated, distributed social network based on WordPress.
Yeah, and that's a Hadoop project.
Yeah.
Just a quick question to see how OpenAuth compares to CAS, the Common Authentication System, if it's related or what the difference is, or...
I've never heard of CAST.
I know they use it at various universities, so you can log in with the same credentials. So if I have CAS on my website, I can, you know, as a student of the university, I can use the credentials without having to know them. It seems like pretty much the same thing.
That sounds a lot like OpenID.
What's the nice thing about OAuth was it was a bunch of independent sort of people as well as members of different companies like Twitter and Ma.gnolia and Pounce, et cetera, coming together and saying, we have this common issue. Let's try to solve it so that it works for everyone included as well as our end users, right? So they're not, so it wasn't necessarily developed, and it was developed very openly in the community. All the documents were published in process, given a lot of feedback to. So that's probably the difference, because as Larry said, I haven't heard of the other system, but probably because it was developed sort of in secret.
Hi, Eve Mailer. This is just a quick comment on the last question. I haven't heard of CAS either, but federated identity is kind of what I do, and it sounds a little bit similar to the Shibboleth system, which is, it's similar to OpenID, but it's based on SAML.
Okay. Well, thank you very much, and feel free to come talk.